Thank you for all being here today. I just wanted to say how honored I am that each of you have decided to be here and join me in this amazing celebration of life. I don't know if all of you know that today is my 50th birthday. And my birthday present to myself is, in a way, rebirthing myself. I came out of the spiritual closet a few weeks ago, as Doreen Virtue would call it. And I stopped calling myself a life coach and started really owning up to the truth that I have this really amazing gift. And I'm an oracle on behalf of the Divine Feminine. She's been giving me messages for about the past 5 years. And just to give you a little history behind this, up until I want to say 2009, I was pretty much an atheist. Not that I didn't believe in God at all, or that I was kind of against the whole God thing, quite honestly. I was raised in a very fundamentalist religion in a cult-like environment in Montana, a community of about 500 people. And this was a very patriarchal society. So as a result of this upbringing, I was exposed to a lot of abuse, physically, mentally, spiritually, sexually, until I found myself in a battle with suicide, and I ran away from home when I was a teenager, when I decided I had the choice to either kill myself or run away. So I ended up finding a way out of this community. And as a result of that, I wanted nothing to do with anything that even slightly resembled religion of any kind. You couldn't get me anywhere near a church, unless it was like a spiritual center. I kind of learned to differentiate between the two. And the word God itself felt like a swear word to me. It was not even allowed in my house. And then I started having some really interesting experiences. I have 2 kids. I had my midlife, what others might call a midlife crisis, I now call my midlife rebirth. It was this midlife awakening experience that began with my entire life starting to crumble around me. And I started having to restructure who I am and why I'm here. And it became the impetus for this amazing spiritual awakening. And it began with me trying to figure out how to fix my life. I began walking through my community. I started becoming suicidal again because I'd lost my business and my husband had lost his business. And we were in the throes of bankruptcy and foreclosure on our house, and both my kids were diagnosed with learning disorders. And I needed to figure out how to find myself again. So I started walking around my neighborhood and asking myself, how do I fix my life? I had gotten to the point where I was starting to think suicidal thoughts again. And I knew I didn't want to abandon my kids. So I started asking myself, how do I fix my life? And a voice actually started coming through that started telling me how to fix my life. And that actually became the book, Transcending Fear, that I wrote. Is the process that my inner voice taught me. In the book, I call it my inner therapist, because at the time, that's what I really needed, was a therapist. And then my daughter started saying some interesting things to me. She was about 5 years old, and she said, one day she came home from school, and she said, "Mommy, the kids at school were talking about God." And I said, "Daddy and I don't believe in God." And she just started crying. And so I had to sit there, and I thought, I said, it's not that we don't believe in God, but God for us is more like Mother Nature. And she said, "Oh, okay." And that was perfectly good for her. But it really got me thinking that maybe I need to start really considering this, because this is probably not the only time this conversation is going to come up in my house. I had a 2-year-old son at the time as well. So it made me have to start thinking. And then she said to me another time, "Mommy, when I'm asleep, sometimes I leave and I go play with my angel friends." And I thought, that is interesting. I had never heard anything so crazy in my life. My idea of angels were the angels I grew up with in my very fundamentalist patriarchal religion. And it didn't sound to me like anything like the angels she went and played with in her sleep. So then I started really thinking. I wanted to write another book. It's another book I've been working on. And I started attending a spiritual center in Los Angeles called Agape International Spiritual Center. And I don't know if you've heard of this place, but it's Reverend Michael Beckwith. He was one of the experts on The Secret, and I had recently discovered The Secret. And so I started going to his spiritual center, and while I was there, I found a business card on the wall from a person who does branding. I had just decided I want to be a life coach and a public speaker. So I called up this woman who does branding, and the name of her company was Spiritual in Nature. And I thought, okay, this is somebody who's going to know how to brand me, because at that point I realized after writing the book Transcending Fear that what was missing in my life was a spiritual connection to myself. I didn't even quite know what that meant, but I knew that what was missing was a spiritual connection to myself, and that where I needed the healing was in my spiritual center. And so I called her up, we met, and long story short, the date was 11/1/11. And through a series of really interesting synchronicities, I ended up on a couch next to her. And she said to me, I'm getting the insight that I need to do something really different with you. I know you're here for branding, but something tells me I need to do something very different with you. So she sat down, she pulled out this crystal. Of course, we're in this beautiful crystal space. And I thought, oh my gosh, like I didn't quite know what to think of all this, because this was very woo-woo and weird for me. And she started going into this, she said, I have to warn you that when I get into this space of channeling, I had no idea what channeling was, but she told me I channel, and when I start channeling, my chin starts quivering, and I never know what's going to come out. So I was sitting there thinking, you know, I'm open to just about anything at this point. The stuff my daughter says is pretty weird and wacky, so kids seem to be connected to something that the rest of us aren't, so I'm just going to listen to this lady. And she said, I'm getting the insight that I need to bridge you to your higher self. Again, I'd never heard the term higher self. What does that mean? And so she sat and she did this weird thing with me that I now know some people do when they're channeling. It was a very interesting experience. And then afterwards, she said, I don't know if that even worked. And I said, I don't know either. I had started crying while she was working with me, and I just felt like a flood of energy, but I didn't know that it meant anything. So that night, I was standing in my kitchen, and my daughter said to me, Mommy, sometimes I can be in the same place at two different places at the same time. And I just looked at her and I said, wow, that's really cool. I wish I could do that. I had no idea there was actually a term for it, which of course now I know that it's called bilocating. But that was just such a mind-opening thing for me. And then I started to just get this feeling that I needed to go take a bath. I have this big, gorgeous bathtub that I never use, or I try to use once in a while, but I had this insight to go take a bath. So I'm laying in the bathtub, and I start hearing a voice. And what I heard was, our worlds are about to collide. And I'm laying in the bathtub, and I said, who is this? And she said, I am you in the fourth dimension, and our worlds are about to collide. Now, if you're raised in a very fundamentalist religion, like I know one of our guests is, the first thing my mind went is, oh my gosh, another planet's going to slam into planet Earth, just like my dad predicted when I was a kid. And I started like having these PTSD flashbacks, going into total panic, and at the same time thinking, well, that's just ridiculous. We know enough about the universe to know that there isn't another planet that's going to smash into ours. So my dad was obviously wrong about this. And so I just sat with that and I said, what do you mean? And she said, the fourth dimension is about to converge with the third dimension. Our dimensions are about to collide. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. What are dimensions? And she just said, you know, just, it's good. I am you and I am with you. And my message is complete, that sort of thing. I've been laying there in the bathtub and thinking, this was just bizarre. Never heard of another voice, never heard of dimensions. She's going to give me more information. And worlds are about to collide. So I called this friend of mine the next day and I said, I got this weird message in the bathtub last night and I think whatever it is that you did yesterday worked. She said something about dimensions colliding, and my friend said, yeah, that's fine. It's just the fourth dimension merging with the third dimension, and then we'll all be in this fifth dimensional frequency. And I said, great. Don't know what that means, but obviously this worked. And so it was just interesting. That was the beginning of me finding that there was really my own validation that there is something bigger out there than what I thought was out there. And that she was giving me words that I had never even heard of or couldn't even conceive of. And suddenly my little universe of what I thought reality was started to shift. And I started to understand that reality isn't necessarily what we see. As I had the perception that if I can't see it, it isn't real, it doesn't exist. So religion's all hoopla, spirituality's all hoopla, none of it's real, and it's just, I didn't believe in any of it. And it suddenly made me have to start reconsidering that perhaps there's something more. And over the next couple of weeks, I started getting some other really interesting messages with codes and numbers and being told about frequencies and grids around the planet and a whole bunch of things I didn't know. And I would just defer them to my friend because they didn't make any sense to me. And then just in complete and absolute transparency, because I think it's really important to always be as transparent as possible, that my name is not Victoria. My birth name is Margaret. And I was writing this book and also bringing in these messages, and I kept getting this idea that my messenger name isn't Margaret. So I was standing on the beach one day, and I heard this dad say to his daughter, Victoria, Victoria. And it was like suddenly all this flash of the lightning bolts, if you will. And it was, that's the name. I've always loved that name. Even when I was a little girl, I loved that name. I loved that name so much in college that I was going to name my daughter Victoria. I didn't name her that, but I'd always had a real affinity to that name. So I sat with that for a while, and I started to understand that I was actually channeling an energy named Victoria. And I told my husband, I said, I have this energy named Victoria that speaks to me. And he said, so like that Esther Hicks, she's crazy. And so I had given him an Esther Hicks CD with Abraham, and he said, that woman's nuts. You can't tell people that. So I said, then is it okay if I market myself in her name? And he said, sure, just don't tell anybody you channel her. And so for the last 5 years, I've been marketing myself as Victoria and never really told anybody that I channeled this Victoria. Well, in the meantime, I would get up in the morning and write in my notebook, and I would call on this Victoria energy, and she kept saying, I am you. And I would say, of course, I know you're me. In the universe, we're all one. And she would say, I am you. And then one day I was talking to a friend of mine, and she said, she was talking about another friend of hers who channels his higher self, but he doesn't use his higher self name like I do. And I said, is that what that is? So I'm really channeling myself? And she said, yes, you're just channeling your higher self. And then suddenly it started to really unravel that's really when we are in that space of inspiration, and we're all always channeling, we're always bringing information in from the imaginal realm, that it's through our higher self that's feeding us that information. And so what she's been feeding me for the past 5 years is understanding from the divine feminine. And the best way to explain the divine feminine is the feminine aspect of all that is. Sometimes it's just the all that is feminine, that loving essence that is all of us. And sharing with me her side of the story and her perspective of what has occurred on our planet and what's currently occurring on our planet. And I've been given an amazing gift of being able to see humanity through the eyes of her unconditional love, and how so much of what we've been taught in his story is a little off. So she tells me her side of the story, which is so beautiful and so loving and so free of conditions. And that all of these expectations we've created upon ourselves are all just human constructs. So I decided a couple of months ago that it was time for me to start coming out from the proverbial closet, coming out from under wraps. And I've slowly been testing this and seeing how it's received, because I had this perception that if I came out and told people that I was a conscious channel or an oracle, which I now is much more resident with me than a channel, that I would have all this judgment and all these people hate me. And what I've been receiving instead is, oh, it's about time. I've had people in tears over how much we need our mother, and that we're in the position that we're in because we forgot about her. And she never left us. We just abandoned her. And we have ourselves in this separation anxiety, not understanding that we're the ones that actually created the separation. She's always been there. So I started coming out as an oracle a couple of months ago, and really just in the last couple of weeks. And so I'm here with you today, and I'm so honored that you're here celebrating with me today as my birthday present to all of you, and also a birthday present to myself. This is the first time that I've channeled live in front of an audience. And so I thank you for creating this space for me to do this, because it's kind of scary for me. I usually write it down in a notebook, and then I record it, and then I tell everybody that it's my teachings, when it's really not my teachings. It's me absorbing them and then reteaching them as a physical message, when they're actually just beautiful messages that come in from the space of her.